All right, this is the audio recording for the Government Vocabulary Slideshow. If you've not listened to one of these before, typically what will happen is I'll read through the slide. I may add a little bit of information or try to explain it a little bit further if you need it. And then at the end of the slide, before I switch from that slide to another slide, I will say next slide. That way, if you're trying to write something down or taking notes, whatever it is, and you need to pause it, that's to give you a heads up that would be a good time to pause so you don't get stuck trying to write something from one slide and I've already moved on to another. So with that being said, let's get into this. Next slide. This is the definition for autocracy, and the basic definition here is just that one person has the power. As we talk about these government systems, the idea is just determining how many people have power. And with an autocracy, it's just one person. All right, we've talked about a bunch of different kinds of autocracies and stuff like that, whether it be a monarchy with a king, a queen, an emperor, something like that, or a dictatorship or whatever it is. But basically, it's just like one person has all of the power. And they may give some of that power to other people that work for them and things like that. But basically, all the big stuff comes down to this one person. Next slide. The easiest example of an autocracy that most people can come up with is North Korea, where you have currently Kim Jong-un is in charge there. He has absolute power. The reason for the silly picture here is the idea of an autocracy. Like, you think about an automobile. All right, how many people do you want driving the automobile? How many people do you want driving the car? That is one. Otherwise, it goes all kind of different directions. So, that's the reason for the kind of the silly little cartoon here with Kim Jong-un being the driver of this car. He is essentially the driver of North Korea, for better or for worse. And in their case, it's definitely for worse. Next slide. All right, now the number of people that have power is getting a little bit bigger. This is called an oligarchy. And we add a little bit. We talked about this a little bit in the fall, but we're adding a new part to the definition. The definition here reads, a few rich and or powerful people or a single political party have the power. Now, the rich and powerful part we talked about back in the fall. All right, the idea that there's people that are just have so much money and so much already built up social power and everything like that, that they're able to influence the government and basically make the government do what they want. The other version of that is that when you have a single political party that has all of the power. A good example of that is we'll talk about in just a second is the Communist Party, where there may be other parties or there may be other people, but really the only people who stand a chance of getting any kind of government power are the people that are members of these single political parties. So it's a little bit different, in terms of the number of people. In terms of an oligarchy versus an autocracy, obviously you've gone from one person to however many constitute or make up this small group. But in terms of the actual practice and everything like that, for the regular people, it really doesn't change anything. In both an autocracy and an oligarchy, regular people have very, very little power or influence in the government at all. Next slide. Little, picture. Obviously here you have somebody who is holding up some bags of money, so obviously is rich, and usually when you're rich, you got some power to you too. So that's the initial example, the early example we gave of an oligarchy was the idea of people that had a lot of money and a lot of power and were influenced the government. Next slide. This, on the other hand, is the new one. We talked about the single political party. China, North Korea have, these big communist parties and things like that. And if you're not a member of the party, you're not part of the group, you really don't have any say in the government of any kind. So that's kind of the new kind of way to think about an oligarchy, is the idea that it can also be this, single political power or single political party. Next slide. All right, now we've really expanded the number of people that have power, because when you get to a democracy, as the definition reads, the regular people have the power. All right. And there are two types, and we'll get to those in a second. But in a democracy, regular people have the power. That means regular, everyday citizens have the ability to influence and control the government. All right, it's kind of the reverse of the other two. The other two, the governments control the people. In a democracy, the people control the government. All right, and as it says here, there are two types. So let's get to that. Next slide. This is a little image with you see people raising their hands, and that's just a very simple style of voting. So you people power democracy. That means that the people are the ones in charge of the democracy. So that's what that's to represent. Next slide. Parliamentary democracy is one of the two types of democracy. All right, and in a parliamentary democracy, the leader is part of the legislative branch of government. All right, so you have the legislature, which we'll talk about shortly in terms of that's the group of people that are elected to change and create laws. And in a parliamentary democracy, the person who becomes the eventual leader of the country is elected into that legislature, and then the legislature picks one of the members of the legislature to become the leader. And it changes how that happens a couple of different ways and things like that. But the most important part is to understand that when you say a parliamentary democracy, you're talking about a country that has a leader that is a member of the legislature of that country. Next slide. Oh, here's a perfect example, like visually, if you need a visual example of parliamentary democracy. You see people voting up there in the top left, and they're voting for the legislature, and then the legislature votes for the leader. So we get down here to this picture, obviously, Abraham Lincoln, and that's how parliamentary democracy works. The people vote for the legislature votes for the leader. This is what we've discussed as before. It's called an indirect vote. And the reason is, look at the arrows. There's not an arrow going directly from the people voting to the picture of Abraham Lincoln. The people don't directly affect the presidency or the leadership. All right, they elect some people and then to a legislature, and then those people create or elect the leader. So it's kind of like, we're going to take this step. We're going to vote for the legislature, and we're going to hope that they put the person I want to be in charge, but we don't really have any control about it. All right, so it's indirect. Next slide. All right, here's the other version of democracy. It's a presidential democracy. It's the one we're more familiar with because it's our country. The leader is separate from the legislative branch of the government. Okay, so this is a situation where when we vote for a legislature, just like we did before, but we also have a separate vote that votes for the leader. So instead of saying, okay, we want the legislature and we hope that they're going to put the person that we want in charge, this is a situation where we say, okay, we're going to vote for the legislature, and now we're also going to vote directly for the person we want. So we're going to see a kind of a graphic representation of that in just a second. Next slide. All right, so here we go. Presidential democracy, you see we have two separate votes here. You got the people voting again, and they're voting for that legislature. But then you have the people voting, and they're voting for the leader also. All right, so they're actually putting pen to paper or however, electronic vote, however it's being done. But they actually have a direct say about what's going to happen in terms of who's going to be the legislature and who's going to be the leader. Next slide. All right, we've said legislature a couple different times. This is the definition of legislature. It's a group of people who are responsible for creating, changing, or eliminating laws. So these are the people that get elected, and they, depending on what government you're looking at, different responsibilities. But the one that kind of shows up in every country, if you have a legislature, the legislature's responsibility is the thing about creating and changing and eliminating laws. And there's a whole process for that. If you want to, you can go look up on YouTube the old Schoolhouse Rock thing about I'm a bill and how it becomes a law and stuff like that. I may actually try to find that and put it in the at-home work for you guys to take a look at if you'd like. I think Ms. Cronkleton may have shown it to you, but just in case, I'll post it. But this is their responsibility. The last thing up there, the eliminating laws, that's a situation where if a law is determined to go against, like for our country, it would be go against the Constitution, then at that point it's determined that it's illegal, and it's, they vote it down, they remove it from the the list of laws and things like that we have to abide by. So, but the legislature, that's their main responsibility. Next slide. Here's some examples of legislatures. So we have the United States Congress, and we have what's called a bicameral legislature, which means we have two houses, and in our case, it's the Senate. Each state has 2 senators, so there's 50 states, 100 senators, and then we also have the House of Representatives, and that is a situation where each state has a certain number of representatives based on the population of that state. So you have states that are like California, which have massive numbers of representatives. And then you also have states like, North Dakota, which has 1 representative because the population is so low. So different places do it different ways. That's how the United States does it. A couple of other examples. You have the Japanese Diet or Diet. I've heard both pronunciations. You have the Israeli Knesset, and then you have British Parliament. And every country pretty much has some version of a parliament or a legislature of some kind that is there to create laws. So, just understand when you look at a body of people that have been put in power to, do the laws and create the laws and stuff, that's a legislature. Next slide. Suffrage. This is the right to vote. This is super important, especially, of course, in a democracy, because this is how we say people have the power in a democracy. This is what gives them that power. This is what allows them to affect the government, because we elect leaders, in the government, and we say, okay, you need to go, this is what we want you to do, and this is what needs to happen. So you need to take care of this. And if they do a good job, then, we vote them back into office the next time. If they don't do a good job, we find somebody else to do that job. And that's how the control is. It's like I've pointed out, and I've said it in class before, in our country, it's a representative democracy. So the people we elect, they work for you. They work for the people who voted for them. So technically, it's always fun to say it, but, the president is your employee. The members of Congress, the members of, the various parts of the government, they work for you. That's important to remember. So, we don't elect kings and things like that in this country. They work for you. So remember that when you guys get ready to vote and everything. All right, but suffrage, that's the right to vote. That's the ability to go out and vote for who you want to be in charge. Next slide. All right. The next 2 terms kind of go with each other a little bit. This one right here, secular. Now pay attention. This is one that people always forget. But secular, this is when you have laws, leaders, and culture that are not based on religion. And it's the opposite of theocracy, which we've talked about before, but I'll remind you about in a second. So this is anything that has to do with or avoids dealing directly with religion, because, for whatever various reasons. Our government in this country has, some religious influence, but we also don't have an official religion of the country. There's no one thing that says if you're going to be a member of this country or a person in this country or vote or whatever that you have to be a certain religion. No. We don't do that. We have what's called a secular government, which is set up so that anybody who is of any faith can vote and participate in the government and have the same rights and things like that. So that's what you're talking about when you say secular. Let's look at its opposite term. Next slide. Theocracy. All right, this is where the government is based on religious law and has religious leaders. Now understand, when I say has religious leaders, I'm not talking about like a person who, if the leader goes to church or the leader goes to a synagogue or a mosque or something like that, oh, they've got a religion, so they're religious. No. I mean that the person who is the leader of the religion is also a leader in the country. So there's a couple different examples of this throughout history. Right now, there's really only 2 that jump to mind. The first one is Iran, which we talked about in the fall. Iran has a religious leadership that's kind of out there, and they don't really take an everyday participation in the government, but if the government does something that they feel is against the religion or shouldn't be done or whatnot, they can override it. Iran looks like a democracy. People can vote and things like that, but if the religious leadership says no, we're not doing that, then they can step in and say no, that's wrong, we're not going to do it. And doesn't matter what the vote was, the religious leaders can overrule that. The other one that I can think of that is current is the Vatican, which is basically the seat of the Roman Catholic Church, which is in the middle of the city of Rome, Italy. They're considered an independent government, and the Pope is considered the overall head of that quote unquote country of the Vatican. But so theocracy is where the government is based on religious laws and has religious leaders. And like I said, you don't see too many of them anymore. That should be it.